Well, Matt, on that critical announcement from David Cameron that the UK will continue to supply weapons to Israel, let's just remind ourselves of how that works. Under British arms export rules, the UK would be prevented from supplying weapons to Israel or any country if it was found that there was, and I quote, clear risk that the items might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Those are the rules. The UK, of course, like many nations, was under immense pressure to review the sale of arms to Israel after last week's killing of aid workers, including Britons who worked for the organisation World Central Kitchen. And not just pressure from opposition parties, but pressure from within the British government itself. But today, having received updated legal advice, David Cameron said that the UK would not be changing its policy. Let's hear how he put that rather awkwardly in a press conference alongside the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken earlier.
The latest assessment leaves our position on export licences unchanged. This is consistent with the advice that I and other ministers have received, and as ever, we will keep the position under review. Our position is in line with our international partners. So far, no like-minded countries have taken the decision to suspend existing arms export licenses to Israel. And I just add, we don't publish legal advice, we don't comment on legal advice, but we act in a way that is consistent with it. We're a government under the law, and that's as it should be.
Well, I was talking afterwards to sources within David Cameron's camp, and they confirmed this, that latest legal advice happened before the killing last week of those aid workers, and that the legal work is carried out pretty much mainly by asking questions and getting assurances from Israel itself, and that the British government would absolutely no way be publishing a summary of that legal advice, Matt.
Siobhan, we know that Lord Cameron and Donald Trump had a tete-a-tete dinner at Mar-a-Lago. What was on the menu? And I'm thinking more conversation than food.
Well, yes, ostensibly that dinner was all about trying to persuade Donald Trump to give the green light for a vote in Congress behind me there that would provide billions of dollars of new funding for Ukraine. Trump has pretty much told the House Speaker to block that vote, and David Cameron was there to tell him, to persuade him that Ukraine's security was Britain's security and was the world's security and America's security. But did that work? Well, we don't know, because despite multiple questions to David Cameron as to how that nice, cosy dinner conversation went, the Foreign Secretary declined steadfastly to provide any details.
Siobhan, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now is Kurt Volker, the former US ambassador to NATO, and Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, who was a diplomat at the US State Department from 2016 to 2023. Wonderful to have you both on the program. Let me start with you, Gina. I mean, Donald Trump never forgets a slight and an insult, and there was David Cameron calling him some unspeakable things just a few years ago. Do you think that that meant this was a pleasant dinner and that Trump would have listened to anything that Cameron had to tell him?
I believe that former President Trump certainly could manage pleasantries during the course of an evening. I also believe that he does not forget slights. Right. This really is a policy disagreement between former President Trump and Foreign Minister Cameron.
But do you think that Lord Cameron could have persuaded Donald Trump to do what Antony Blinken and President Biden want Trump to do, which is to basically unleash those funds from the Republicans in Congress?
I think it would be a great challenge to do that. Former President Trump certainly understands where his party lies, where conservative Americans stand, which is having a wide number of questions about the efficacy of further assistance, whether indeed this is a winnable conflict, and the cost to the U.S. Treasury.
Kurt Volker, do you think the visit by Lord Cameron to Mar-a-Lago was pointless?
No, not at all. I think it's actually good to reach out, even though, as you say, they've had a past rocky relationship. It's better to reach out. I don't think that the issue is really the substance of Ukraine aid right now in the House. You have Speaker Johnson who wants to bring it to the floor. He's talked about ways to do that. You have a majority of Republicans and a majority of Democrats who are ready to support it. So when it does come to a vote, it'll get easily in excess of 300 votes. The issue, though, is the prioritization, because Trump and Republicans have been focusing on the southern border and some of the other major budget issues that we have. And so they've been holding this back as kind of a hostage to move on other issues. What I think Cameron is trying to do is, both in discussing with President Trump and then also with meetings that he had in Washington, highlight the urgency of the situation in Ukraine. The aid is supported by a majority, as I said, but it has dragged on for months. And you now have a situation where Russia is advancing again. They outgun the Ukrainians with artillery, and this aid is now urgently needed.
When I was based in Washington, D.C., I was told by the late Secretary of State Colin Powell that when Colin Powell couldn't get through to George W. Bush, they tasked Tony Blair to basically deliver the message. And Tony Blair developed what they called Oval Office lockjaw. He couldn't quite spit out the critical words that the president had to hear. Do you think that Cameron is being used in a similar way here, saying things to Donald Trump that Donald Trump just wouldn't want to hear from any Democrat?
No, I think that he is playing the card of a conservative Tory leader, former prime minister, to get the access and to have that discussion. I'm not sure he's doing it at the behest of the Biden administration, however. I think this is probably his own initiative. And I think it is because what Britain sees as the urgency of the aid and the uniqueness of the U.S. support that no other allies, including the UK or EU members, are able to fulfill.
Gina, if I can turn to you again. I mean, both the US administration and the government here are getting far more critical of Israel than they were even a few weeks ago. How important is it that they do this together? Does that amount to more critical pressure on the government in Tel Aviv than if the Americans were doing it alone?
I certainly believe that it does. Both countries, as you mentioned earlier, are countries of laws. That stand for international law, international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict. And if there were decisions taken in both countries to modify the policies and the support and how the support is given and what conditions are placed on it or not, together, I think would be enormous pressure on the government of Israel, on the prime minister. Either country doing it is going to be a good deal of pressure, but certainly together, extraordinary.
And yet publicly, briefly, Lord Cameron said today that actually there's no question of taking arms sales to Israel off the table. So he was soft pedaling a bit, wasn't he?
Yes. Well, we have to keep in mind a certain measure of cynicism about how the laws are applied are warranted, number one. Number two, we have to also keep in mind that Israel is not facing just one front. The conflict in Gaza is one battle zone, as it were, but certainly what is going on with regard to Hezbollah, Iraq and Syria in the north, the Houthis attacking in the south, with the UK and the US are very familiar with. These are all fronts that Israel is confronting. And therefore, to stop weapons or to condition them or to identify which are defensive versus offensive weapons, it's very complicated, it's time consuming,
right.
And there's no way that the United States is going to leave Israel undefended.
Kurt Volker, one final one to you. I mean, we discuss the Gaza issue endlessly in this country, but it has not entered the political bloodstream in the way that it has in the US, and it won't be decisive in our election this year, most probably. But it could be decisive for Joe Biden. And do you think that he's putting pressure on Israel because he's afraid that not doing so might lose him this election?
Well, it has entered the political dialogue here in the US as well. You have progressive Democrats who are now opposing aid to Israel or arms to Israel, and even asking for that to be separated from Ukraine assistance in the package that's in Congress right now. And Biden is not doing that. Biden is standing by Israel for all the reasons that Gina just said, which are, I think, very sound. So he is standing by that, and it is causing some frustration on the left of his party. That being said, I think that those people are not going to go vote for Donald Trump. So I don't think it is that great an electoral risk for Biden.
Right. but they might not vote at all, which would also be a problem. Got to leave it there. Kurt Volker, Gina Abercrombie-Winsley, thank you to both of you.